Good morning, evening, or night, wherever you are. Welcome to WHAM today. Take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's drift through the whispers of today's world. One quiet thought at a time. As we wrap up Friday, 20th June 25, let's see what stories are unfolding around us. Israel and Iran's conflict has escalated sharply, with both nations exchanging strikes and heated rhetoric. Israel has warned of a prolonged war against Iran, targeting missile facilities and air defense systems within the country. Israeli forces claim to have destroyed Iranian surface-to-air missiles to prevent further attacks. Iran responded with a missile strike that wounded many in Haifa. Israel accused Iran of using cluster munitions in an attack, a weapon banned by many nations. Diplomats from both countries clashed at a UN meeting, with Iran asserting its right to self-defense and Israel vowing continued strikes until Iran's nuclear threat is neutralized. Experts are divided on the legality of Israel's airstrikes under international law. Protests have erupted in Iran, Iraq, and Lebanon, reflecting anger over Israel's expanding military actions. Iran's Foreign Minister, Abbas Araghchi, has been in Geneva for discussions with EU diplomats amid these tensions. Gideon Levy, a Haaretz columnist, argued that Israel has no right to pursue regime change in Iran. Gaza is facing a severe humanitarian crisis. UNICEF has cautioned that the collapse of water systems threatens a devastating drought and widespread hunger. Reports allege that Israeli forces have killed Palestinians seeking aid. 24 people were reportedly killed by Israeli fire in central Gaza, and at least 44 Palestinians were killed on a Friday while trying to obtain food. 60 individuals were reportedly killed by Israeli forces in Gaza, with half of the deaths occurring near aid centers established by the U.S. and Israel-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation after Israel eased a 2-month aid blockade. The EU has stated that there are indications Israel is violating human rights obligations in Gaza, but stopped short of immediate sanctions. A leaked EU document references Article 2 of the EU-Israel Association Agreement in this context. An EU audit report suggests potential breaches of the EU-Israel human rights agreement linked to Israel's actions in Gaza and the West Bank. The situation has drawn comparisons between outrage over attacks on Soroka Hospital and repeated strikes on Gaza hospitals. In the U.S., President Donald Trump has reportedly given Iran a maximum of 2 weeks to avoid potential U.S. airstrikes. Trump has also called for a special prosecutor to investigate the 2020 election. The White House is considering direct involvement in the Israel-Iran conflict. The Israeli military requires American assistance to destroy a critical nuclear site in Iran. Israel is facing a strategic dilemma as it awaits Trump's decision on a U.S. attack, which places a greater strain on Israel's defenses. MAGA is divided over Israel and Iran, raising questions about whether a U.S. strike against Iran could impact support for President Trump. Pro-Palestinian activist Mahmoud Khalil was released after a U.S. judge's order. President Trump has labeled protests against Israel's Gaza war as anti-Semitic and threatened to deport participating foreign students. The IAEA has warned of a potential nuclear disaster should Israel attack Iran's Bushehr nuclear plant. The UN nuclear chief echoed this warning, urging diplomacy. British nationals wishing to leave Israel will be offered charter flights from Tel Aviv once the airspace reopens, according to Foreign Secretary David Lammy. Divisions and anxiety are increasing in Europe due to the hostilities in the Middle East. A report is examining the broad impact of the Israel-Iran war on the Middle East, considering the potential for a wider conflict and the reactions of Tehran residents. China is actively expanding its global influence through technological advancements and financial strategies. The country launched the International Organization for Mediation, IOMed, to shape global governance models. In technology, China tested artillery-launched drones, developed mosquito-sized drones for covert military operations, and created a 6G-powered electronic warfare system. Economically, China is overhauling its mutual fund industry to boost investor confidence and launching a Payment Connect scheme with Hong Kong to facilitate cross-border payments. Hong Kong residents now have a new daily remittance quota for the yuan. However, China's magnet exports to the US have declined due to rare earth curbs and trade war tensions. President Xi Jinping commemorated Chen Yuan's 120th birth anniversary. The Communist Party cautioned against addiction to blind card packs among youths and urged frugality on official banquets. China emphasizes respect for the elderly, rooted in Confucian teachings. In maritime affairs, China used a water cannon to expel a Philippine vessel from Scarborough Shoal. The Smithsonian returned 2 volumes of the ancient Sidanku silk manuscript to China. Hong Kong is playing a crucial role in China's financial strategies. It is seen as the ideal location to develop offshore yuan-pegged stablecoins. China's central bank is launching a Payment Connect program with Hong Kong to facilitate cross-border payments. Hong Kong residents have been granted a new daily remittance quota for the yuan. The United States may target Samsung, Hynix, and TSMC operations in China by revoking authorizations to receive U.S. goods and technology. China has expressed willingness to collaborate with the U.S. on combating drugs and repatriating illegal immigrants. Masayoshi Son is pitching a $1 trillion US AI hub to TSMC and the Trump team. The European Union and China, currently at odds, may align more closely if Donald Trump returns to office. Europe's ambition to decarbonize transportation depends on sourcing lithium abroad, especially in South America. President Xi Jinping told New Zealand Prime Minister Christopher Luxon that China has no fundamental conflict of interest with New Zealand and called for managing differences constructively. Christopher Luxon raised the Cook Islands impasse with the Chinese premier in Beijing. Iran is facing escalating tensions following Israeli airstrikes, compounded by a 5.1 magnitude earthquake in the north. The Iranian regime is reportedly leveraging the conflict to consolidate domestic support, even as protests erupt across the country. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, speaking in Geneva, conditioned diplomacy with the U.S. on an end to Israeli aggression and accountability for Israel. He participated in talks with European foreign ministers in Geneva to de-escalate the crisis, but no significant progress was made. Meanwhile, some Iranians abroad report difficulties contacting family, and thousands of Afghans are crossing the border daily, fleeing war and deportation. Amidst these events, an Iranian strike in Haifa damaged a mosque and a church, further fueling the conflict. Israel's surprise attack on Iran has destabilized the Middle East, challenging existing power dynamics. The attack has triggered widespread protests within Iran. The UN Security Council convened a tense session addressing the conflict, filled with mutual accusations and urgent calls for peace. The United States, through its Treasury Department, imposed sanctions on an individual and 8 entities involved in procuring sensitive machinery for Iran's defense sector. President Trump has sent conflicting messages regarding potential strikes on Iran, hinting at a possible ceasefire while also expressing a preference for a deal to avoid further U.S. involvement and rising oil prices. He also dismissed the diplomatic efforts in Geneva. Trump has contradicted his Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, regarding Iran's nuclear capabilities. Within the Trump administration, deep divisions exist regarding U.S. involvement in the conflict. The State Department reported that hundreds of U.S. citizens have left Iran in the past week, facing delays and harassment. The escalating conflict between Iran and Israel has spurred international concern and diplomatic maneuvers. Despite a meeting in Geneva between European and Iranian foreign ministers, attempts to prevent further escalation have been largely unsuccessful. The prospects for diplomacy are considered bleak after Trump's rejection of European efforts. The conflict is raising questions about India's position, balancing its energy security, economic stability, and diplomatic ties. China, a major oil importer from Iran, possesses limited influence to prevent a potential U.S. attack. Russia's President Vladimir Putin, speaking at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum, asserted that Russia needs balanced growth to avoid recession, highlighting curbed inflation and reduced reliance on energy exports as positive signs. A Russian activist who provided assistance to Ukrainian refugees received a 22-year sentence for treason and financing terrorism. Serhiy Serdyuk, a Ukrainian head teacher from Komish, was deported from Russia and barred from re-entry for 40 years after he refused to implement the Russian curriculum in the occupied territory. Additionally, Russian forces launched drone attacks on Odessa, Ukraine, resulting in 1 death and 14 injuries, with at least 10 strikes hitting residential buildings and causing fires. Turning to Ukraine, 1 person was killed and 14 others were injured during an overnight Russian drone attack on Odessa. The attack included at least 10 drone strikes on residential buildings, causing fires. A Ukrainian woman was rescued from a burning building in Odessa after one of the deadly Russian strikes. Ukrainian prisoners of war returning from Russia often report degrading treatment while in captivity, and they face varied paths as they try to reintegrate. Serhiy Serdyuk, the Ukrainian head teacher from Komish, was deported from Russia and banned from re-entry for 40 years for his refusal to implement the Russian curriculum in the occupied territory. Across the Atlantic, in the United States, President Donald Trump claimed that US intelligence is wrong about Iran not building a nuclear bomb, directly contradicting the intelligence community. He also reiterated a 2-week timeline for deciding whether the U.S. would join Israel's strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, placing pressure on Tehran to negotiate. Bernie Sanders asserted that US aid to Israel in a war on Iran would be catastrophic, urging Trump to collaborate with the international community to restrain Netanyahu. The Republican Party is reportedly divided on whether President Trump should involve the U.S. in a potential Israel-Iran conflict. US Vice President J.D. Vance accused California Governor Gavin Newsom and Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass of encouraging violent immigration protests during a visit to Los Angeles. Local reporters were allegedly barred from the press conference. Mahmoud Khalil, a Columbia University graduate student, was released from US immigration detention after being held for over 3 months for activism against Israel's war on Gaza. A judge ruled he poses no danger. US Ambassador Dorothy Shee accidentally stated that Israel's government had spread chaos, terror, and suffering. The U.S. Supreme Court revived lawsuits against Palestinian authorities from Americans killed or wounded in the Middle East. The Pentagon rerouted a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier strike route from the Indo-Pacific to the Middle East, prompting caution in Taiwan. Analysts suggest the U.S. must balance operational needs in the Middle East with long-term strategic interests in the Indo-Pacific. TikTok thanked US President Donald Trump while stating it was still working with Vice President J.D. Vance, who was tasked with brokering a deal under a sell or ban law. Full-scale models of autonomous drones for the U.S. Air Force's 6th-generation fighter jets were displayed at the Paris Air Show, focusing on deployment in the Indo-Pacific. Southeast Asia feels unreliable due to the Trump administration's policies, which have shaken relations with the U.S. through tariffs and aid withdrawal, while maintaining a military presence focused on China. In Israel, Bernie Sanders stated that US aid to Israel in a war on Iran would be catastrophic, urging Trump to collaborate with the international community to restrain Netanyahu. US Ambassador Dorothy Shea accidentally stated that Israel's government had spread chaos, terror, and suffering. The U.S. Supreme Court revived lawsuits against Palestinian authorities from Americans killed or wounded in the Middle East. US President Donald Trump reiterated a 2-week timeline for deciding whether the U.S. would join Israel's strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, pressuring Tehran to negotiate. Meanwhile, in Iran, US President Donald Trump claimed that US intelligence is wrong about Iran not building a nuclear bomb, contradicting the intelligence community. He also reiterated a 2-week timeline for deciding whether the U.S. would join Israel's strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities, placing pressure on Tehran to negotiate. Bernie Sanders stated that US aid to Israel in a war on Iran would be catastrophic, urging Trump to collaborate with the international community to restrain Netanyahu. The Republican Party is reportedly divided on whether President Trump should involve the U.S. in a potential Israel-Iran conflict. Shifting to Hong Kong, teachers were reportedly warned via messages to avoid its Independence Day celebrations to prevent violating national security laws. In Southeast Asia, the region feels unreliable due to the Trump administration's policies, which have shaken relations with the U.S. through tariffs and aid withdrawal, while maintaining a military presence focused on China. Finally, in China, Huawei Technologies unveiled HarmonyOS 6, new AI models and Cloud Matrix 384 AI rack architecture, accelerating efforts to build an in-house software ecosystem amid U.S. sanctions. A beta version of HarmonyOS 6 features AI agent. Japan is actively strengthening its defense capabilities amidst regional tensions. The Coast Guard recently conducted joint drills with the U.S. and the Philippines, focusing on crisis simulation near its southwest shore to enhance defense cooperation in response to increased Chinese maritime activities. Japan also intends to provide defense equipment as security assistance to Thailand, Tonga, and 6 other nations this fiscal year. A 2+2 meeting with the U.S. was cancelled due to the U.S. request for Japan to increase its defense budget to 3.5% of GDP. Economically, the Finance Ministry proposed decreasing the issuance of 20, 30, and 40-year bonds by a total of $3.2 trillion, $22 billion through March 2026. Japan is seeking flexibility in tariff talks with the U.S., hoping for an extension beyond the July 9 deadline, with U.S. negotiators hinting at possible extensions given good faith negotiations. Archaeologically, a Japanese team unearthed potential tomb artifacts, including an iron knife and armor fragments, at the country's largest ancient keyhole-shaped tomb. The rainy season is expected to return next week, following a period of rising temperatures. In diplomacy, Ishiba advocated for expanded Japan-South Korea exchanges, and the Prime Minister reported positive discussions with South Korean President Lee Jae-myung in Canada. Turning to China, the nation's naval capabilities are under scrutiny. Japan reported that Chinese aircraft carriers conducted over 1,000 sorties during Pacific training exercises, underscoring China's increasing ability to operate in distant seas and airspace, contributing to rising regional tensions. The article also references Gandhi's philosophy, particularly his emphasis on love over brute force and his initial response to the atomic bombing of Hiroshima. Additionally, 4 restaurants from Japan were recognized on the world's 50 best list, including 3 from Tokyo, with Cezanne climbing to number 7. India is grappling with infrastructure challenges, evidenced by a recent Air India plane crash that disrupted flight schedules and triggered government intervention. The crash, which caused flight cancellations and delays, led to Air India cutting international flights in response to passenger complaints and official pressure. Despite government assurances, Prime Minister Modi's water plan is struggling to alleviate water scarcity, with reports of non-functional water tanks and broken taps. Western India's sugar fields are also under scrutiny for abuses like coerced hysterectomies and child marriages, prompting action following a court ruling and a Times investigation. Amidst the ongoing conflict with Israel, Operation Sindhu successfully evacuated 290 Indian students from Iran to Delhi, underscoring special cooperation from Iran. India and Canada are also working to repair diplomatic ties, reinstating high commissioners following the 2023 killing of a Sikh separatist leader, with Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Canadian counterpart Mark Carney committing to strengthen relations. Turning to the United States, the Trump administration's revocation of student visas is raising concerns about academic freedom and diversity at prominent universities, including Harvard, Northwestern, and the University of California. United Kingdom. The UK is currently facing its first heat wave of the year, leading health officials to issue warnings about sun exposure and heat stroke. Investment in air conditioning is increasing to adapt to the more frequent high-temperature events. The UK Parliament approved a bill legalizing assisted dying for some terminally ill people, potentially marking a significant social shift after months of debate following an initial vote last year. British police are investigating a security breach at RAF Bryce Norton, where Palestine Action activists claimed responsibility for damaging 2 aircraft with red paint after entering the base using electric scooters, highlighting escalating tensions surrounding the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. A British F-35B stealth fighter made an emergency landing at Thiruvananthapuram International Airport in Kerala, India, due to a suspected hydraulic system failure, emphasizing growing defense ties between the UK and India. Russia, Ukraine. Russian President Vladimir Putin declared that he considers all of Ukraine as belonging to Russia, and hinted at a possible advance by Russian forces on the Ukrainian city of Sumy as part of a broader strategy to create a buffer zone along the border region to protect against cross-border attack. Russia's President Vladimir Putin has not dismissed the possibility of capturing a strategic Ukrainian city. The persistent conflict in Ukraine, along with Putin's commitment to advancing the offensive, has strained Moscow's aspirations for improved relations with the United States. Turning to the United States, a tariff agreement with Japan has not been reached. The U.S. has threatened to inform several nations about upcoming duty rates on imports. This strengthens Beijing's position in ongoing trade discussions. Poria Amirshahai, a Green Party member initially barred from entering the United States, was later granted a visa. Regarding Iran, a potential strike by the United States, whether targeting an underground uranium enrichment site or assassinating the supreme leader, carries the risk of escalating the conflict into a more perilous and unpredictable situation. Iran is at the center of European diplomatic efforts, as leaders seek a resolution within 2 weeks. British Foreign Secretary David Lammy planned to meet with Iran's Abbas Araqi, along with French, German, and EU representatives. These discussions are a follow-up to Geneva talks involving European representatives and Iran's foreign minister, aimed at de-escalating the military conflict involving Israeli airstrikes on Iranian nuclear and military sites. Turning to China-EU relations, Chinese Commerce Minister Wang Wentao and European Trade Commissioner Maros Sefcovic held a video call to address economic tensions. They agreed to collaborate on key economic and trade issues for the China-EU agenda this year, in anticipation of a leaders' summit in Beijing. Pakistan is currently grappling with a disinformation campaign waged between Israel and Iran. Despite this challenge, Pakistan has voiced moral support for Iran while simultaneously advocating for diplomatic resolutions to ease regional tensions. Adding to the international stage, Pakistan nominated Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize, referencing his role in de-escalating conflict with India. This came after Trump's own claims that he merited the award. Pakistan Army Chief Azim Munir recently met with President Trump at the White House, reinforcing Pakistan's dedication to regional stability following tensions triggered by the April 22 Pahalgam attack involving India. Thailand is currently grappling with political instability after a leaked phone call between Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra and Cambodia's former leader. Hun Sen ignited public outrage concerning a border dispute. The controversy has led to calls for Shinawatra's resignation and prompted a visit to the Thailand-Cambodia border to ease tensions. Adding to the complexity, a fatal border skirmish has amplified the already heightened tensions between the two nations. The situation is raising concerns about regional stability and the potential undermining of ASEAN's credibility if de-escalation efforts fail. China, holding significant strategic interests in the area, is observing the situation closely. China may work with ASEAN to forestall future conflicts, presenting a test for China's neighborhood diplomacy initiative. Canada's Liberal government is advancing Bill C-5, an infrastructure project aimed at stimulating the economy. The bill has, however, met with resistance from Indigenous communities. These communities are concerned about potential violations of their constitutional rights. In a separate event in Banff National Park, a rock slide occurred close to Bow Glacier Falls, causing the deaths of 2 hikers. 3 others sustained injuries on what was rated a moderately challenging trail. Search and rescue teams have successfully recovered the remains of both deceased hikers. China saw Prime Minister Christopher Luxon of New Zealand meet with Xi Jinping to affirm trade ties, even amidst disagreements on security matters and the broader geopolitical tensions between China and the United States. Turning to the United States, Vice President J.D. Vance is currently in Los Angeles, a city grappling with protests sparked by the Trump administration's escalated immigration enforcement policies. In other news, Donald Trump has taken to Truth Social, repeating unsubstantiated allegations about the 2020 election and pushing for the appointment of a special prosecutor to probe these claims. Armenia's Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan is set to meet with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Turkey. The meeting aims to further normalization efforts between the two nations. Discussions will likely cover the potential reopening of their shared border. The ongoing war between Israel and Iran will also be addressed. This visit represents a significant step towards reconciliation between Armenia and Turkey, offering a chance to mend historically strained relations through direct dialogue. Bangladesh has secured significant financial assistance from international institutions. The Asian Development Bank, ADB, and the World Bank are providing $1.50 billion in loans. These funds will support critical banking sector reforms and climate change mitigation projects. Furthermore, Bangladesh participated in unprecedented trilateral Foreign Office consultation. The talks involved Pakistan and China, signaling a potential shift in regional diplomacy. This marks the first such high-level meeting since Professor Muhammad Yunus's visit to China. Australia is preparing for a superannuation boost as the minimum employer contribution increases to 12% on July 1. Simultaneously, an audit of Australia's appliance efficiency scheme uncovered mismanagement, potentially costing households and businesses billions in power bill saving. This audit also prompted concerns regarding possible corruption and non-compliance. Meanwhile, Sydney's metro stations were honoured at the 2025 NSW Architecture Awards, celebrated as a collaborative project with a lasting impact. Malaysia saw former Prime Minister Najib Razak discharged from a major money laundering case due to the prosecution's failure to provide key documents. The US $6.30 million case was linked to the misappropriation of funds from a state investment fund. In an unrelated incident in Malacca, a 3-month-old baby tragically died after his father, experiencing a fatal heart attack in his sleep, rolled onto the child. France has seen the return of Pornhub, YouPorn, and RedTube after a court intervened. The court temporarily halted the need for EU-based platforms to verify users' ages. ALO, the owner of the sites, initially blocked access to protest the age verification requirement. Niger is moving to nationalize the Samay uranium mine, a facility presently run by Orano. Orano is a company connected to the French government. This decision reflects Niger's changing allegiances, moving away from France and potentially aligning more closely with Russia. Globally, a recent study highlights a concerning trend regarding microplastic contamination. Beverages sold in glass bottles, such as water, soda, beer, and wine, were found to contain more microplastics compared to drinks packaged in plastic bottles. The United States is potentially using its tech sector dominance to exert influence over Europe. A recent example involves Microsoft, which suspended the email account of an international criminal court prosecutor based in the Netherlands. The prosecutor was investigating Israel for alleged war crimes. Germany's population growth slowed considerably in 2024, with an increase of only 121,000 residents, bringing the total to approximately 83.6 million, a significant drop from the 338,000 new residents recorded the previous year. Zimbabwe is seeing a rise in yoga's popularity, especially in wealthier regions. This wellness trend is extending to unconventional locations. A beer tavern in Chitangweza, a low-income town near Harare, hosts early morning yoga to boost mental health. Singapore's financial regulatory landscape is evolving, as the Monetary Authority of Singapore, MAS, increases scrutiny of digital token service providers to combat money laundering and terrorism financing. Looking eastward, Singaporean Prime Minister Lawrence Wong is preparing for a visit to China, where discussions are expected to center on Beijing's role as a dependable partner for Southeast Asian countries and assurances regarding China's economic stability and recovery. Thailand is currently navigating a complex political situation, prompting Prime Minister Srettha Thavisin to schedule a meeting with the army commander. Adding to the delicate climate, Paetongtarn Shinawatra publicly apologized after facing criticism online regarding a phone conversation with former Cambodian leader Hun Sen, though the precise details of the controversy remain unclear. Chile is seeing one of its lawmakers, Carol Cariola, facing an investigation into allegations of using her position to benefit a Chinese businessman. The accusations center around Cariola's alleged orchestration of the businessman's inclusion in an official parliamentary delegation visit to China. Nigeria is currently facing renewed legal pressure as residents from the Bill and Ogal communities in the Niger Delta push forward with their case against Shell and the Shell Petroleum Development Company of Nigeria. The case, which centers on extensive oil pollution impacting their communities, is slated to be heard in a high court trial set for 2027, promising a long road to resolution. Turning our attention to Niger, a troubling incident has unfolded near the borders of Mali and Burkina Faso. An attack perpetrated by armed assailants claimed the lives of 34 soldiers, leaving an additional 14 wounded, further destabilizing an already volatile region. South Africa witnessed a comical moment in Kruger National Park when a baby elephant's attempted charge against a family of tourists ended with the calf tripping and tumbling. In legal news, Toyota has initiated a $361 million lawsuit that The suit alleges negligence in the maintenance of waterways and drainage systems. Toyota claims this negligence contributed to significant flood damage. Brazil is poised to receive a substantial economic boost as Meituan, the Chinese delivery behemoth, earmarks $1 billion for establishing its operational base within the nation. This move underscores the escalating presence of Chinese tech enterprises in the Brazilian economic landscape. But, amid rising tensions, the U.S. military is relocating assets from its bases in Qatar, leading the U.S. Embassy to issue an alert. In Canada, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced new sanctions against individuals involved in the Myanmar military junta. These sanctions target those responsible for undermining peace and security. The measures aim to pressure the regime to restore democracy. Shifting focus to Australia, the government is debating new legislation regarding data privacy. The proposed laws would give citizens greater control over their personal information, while companies could face hefty fines for data breaches. Moving across the globe to Brazil, President Lula da Silva is pushing for stronger environmental protections in the Amazon rainforest. He pledged to increase funding for conservation efforts. His administration aims to curb illegal deforestation. In Germany, Chancellor Olaf Scholz is facing increasing pressure to increase military spending. Allies are urging Germany to meet its NATO commitments. The debate over defense budgets continues to intensify. Azerbaijan's crackdown on media freedom intensified as a court sentenced 7 journalists to prison on various charges. In Costa Rica, Roberto Samcam, a retired Nicaraguan army officer and vocal critic of Nicaraguan President Daniel Ortega, was murdered in San Jose by individuals who reportedly disguised themselves as delivery personnel. Turning to Gaza and Jordan, children from Gaza suffering from cancer are receiving treatment at a specialized cancer center in Jordan. Although a broader initiative to evacuate up to 2,000 patients from Gaza is facing implementation delays. Meanwhile, in Greece, the Coast Guard rescued over 600 migrants from 2 wooden fishing boats found adrift miles off the nation's southernmost coast. Amidst escalating tensions between Iran and Israel in the Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia and other oil-producing states are increasing their oil exports, fearing disruptions to export infrastructure. Adding to the instability, an oil tanker collision near the Strait of Hormuz has sparked further security concerns, with both Iran and Israel accusing each other of endangering international maritime security. Shifting focus to Japan and Mongolia, Emperor Narito and Empress Masako of Japan will embark on a state visit to Mongolia from July 6 to 13, marking the first such high-level exchange between the two countries. Mexico is grappling with the aftermath of Tropical Storm Dalila, which triggered flooding and mudslides in Acapulco, while Hurricane Eric has caused disruption in Oaxaca State. The upcoming NATO summit is facing uncertainty, as Spain has declined to substantially increase its defense spending commitment. In Panama, constitutional protections have been temporarily suspended for 5 days in the northwestern province of Bocas del Toro, a response to 2 months of disruptive protests and road blockade. Rwanda has seen the arrest of a prominent opposition leader who is now charged with aiding an alleged plot to incite public unrest. The United States saw the Trump administration terminate 639 employees at Voice of America, continuing the dismantling of the organization, which was founded in 1942 to counter Nazi propaganda. Under the leadership of President Shavkat Mirziyoyev, Uzbekistan is actively positioning itself as a key investment hub, leveraging its strategic geographic location and implementing market-oriented reforms. Finally, former Zambian President Edgar Lungu will be buried in South Africa following disagreements between his family and the Zambian government regarding his funeral arrangements. And that's a wrap for today's news, because even headlines need a nap. Stay curious, stay kind, and let the noise fade as you find your quiet. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time on WHAM Today.